I welcome everyone. We have a very special guest today, Roger Saxelby. He has been a trainer to hypnotherapists for many years. He had his own training school called Alpha Hypnosis, based in Auckland, New Zealand. And I'm really happy that he's agreed to come on and have a chat today about all sorts of things to do with hypnosis. So I hope you enjoy today's talk time. Roger, I'm really excited to welcome you to the Talk Time podcast today. Really, I'm a bit of a fan of yours because you have shown a lot of curiosity over the years, and you are someone who I know has trained with many amazing trainers over the time that you've been involved with hypnotherapy. For the sake of people out there who don't know who you are, do you want to share a little bit about who you are, a bit about your journey, so we can start there, and then we can begin to, I guess, ask some juicy questions about your take on certain types of hypnotherapy practices.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity, Meredith. That's the first thing. My journey goes back to probably 1950, 52, 53, something like that, when I was about 13 or 14. And I lived in a little country town about 80 odd, well, it used to be miles, kilometers these days, but 84 miles from Melbourne. And in those days, we used to have a local mechanics institute hall. And they were built during the gold rush days all over Australia. And it was the local dance hall, the picture theatre, the council offices, and so on. And I went to see a hypnotist, a stage hypnotist called Ravine the Impossibilist. And my mum went up on stage, and but she wasn't hypnotized. He told her she can't be hypnotized and was sent back to her seat. So for the rest of her life, my dear old mum said, "Roger, I can't be hypnotized." And even when I was qualified, she said, "No, can't be hypnotized." So I said, "I think this guy has hypnotized you to believe you can't be hypnotized." But so that was my first introduction to hypnosis, and I started buying books. I was just fascinated with it. You mentioned curiosity before, because I've always been asking why and want to know things. I want to know everything, which is impossible, of course. But yeah, so I bought books when I lived in Melbourne. I used to go to the bookstore and look through all the books. I'm a voracious reader, and buy books on hypnosis. And then I did lots of various things in as far as work. But the job I had just before training in hypnotherapy, I drove tourist coaches all over Australia, and I met lots of great people, and I got on well with people. And but I woke up one morning thinking, this is just a fill-in. I'm really looking for something that's going to excite me and, for a purpose in my life, to be quite honest. And I thought, I want to be a hypnotherapist. So I decided to go and see a psychologist. Well, I made lots of phone calls. I saw a psychologist and did what they call a vocational sort of assessment. And they find out your various skills and abilities and so on. And at the end of that, they say, if you could be anything at all, what's your first three preferences? So I put down hypnotherapist. And when I went back for the results, the psychologist said, it's a bit impractical at your age. You'd have to go to university and you get a degree in psychology. And this was in Victoria, wasn't the same in the other states. And I'll explain that in a moment. And he said to me, I'd have to have a degree in psychology. And I thought, well, I've read all these books, and some of them are by doctors and psychiatrists, but some of them are just ordinary people, and they're helping. And I thought, I can't believe this. So I made a lot of phone calls and inquiries, and I didn't get anywhere. But I came here to New Zealand on a holiday, on a busman's holiday. And I was on the way up to the Bay of Islands, and I bought a magazine called The Listener. And The Listener had an advertisement for a 3-year course in psychotherapy and hypnotherapy. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So I made a phone call from our morning tea stop. And when I came back to Auckland, I went for an interview, and they said, that's fine, you can do the course, but the only thing is it starts, I think it was 4 weeks. So I went home and put my notice in and came back here, started the course, and you wouldn't believe it, but a short time after starting the course, I discovered I could have moved to New South Wales or South Australia or any other state. I could have trained in hypnotherapy, but it wouldn't have been a 3-year course in psychotherapy and hypnotherapy. So I decided that when I graduate, I'll go back to Sydney instead of Melbourne. But of course, I made a lot of friends here, started my business, and the result is I'm still here. So, and by the way, just to explain about Victoria, a little bit of history. Back in 1966 to 1996, they brought in a law. The psychologists lobbied the government, and to be a hypnotherapist, you had to be a psychiatrist, psychologist, medical doctor, or a minister of religion. Well, I wasn't any of those, and that's why I couldn't practice in Victoria. But I didn't know that I could have practiced in any of the other states in those days, And that all happened because of Scientology. They had a big investigation. It cost millions of dollars into Scientology, and psychologists said that Scientologists are using hypnosis, and it can be used to blackmail people. Well, I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to be a Scientologist to blackmail people. Anyone could do that if they wanted to. But of course, that was just the thinking in those days. So that was why I couldn't practice. And overnight, lots and lots of hypnotherapists just took down their signs, and they practiced the next day as relaxation therapists and all this sort of stuff, So that's why I'm still here in New Zealand. I'm a Kiwi.
You not only became a hypnotherapist, you also became a trainer. Tell me a little bit about how that all started for you.
Well, I started practicing when I graduated. I started practicing in 1980. And actually, when I was here on holidays, I rang a few hypnotherapists trying to get information. And to be honest, none of them were, or most of them were no help whatsoever. But I rang a guy called Warren Fox, who had been in practice for about 15 years at that time. And he was very helpful. And so when I came to live here in New Zealand, I contacted Warren, and we became very good friends. And I was in practice for 7 years, 1987. Warren said, I'm starting up a school because there's so much interest. Do you want to be part of it? So we started up the Auckland School of Hypnotherapy. And Warren and I taught 25 students in classes at times for quite a few years. And then Warren decided to retire. And so I decided to start practicing on my own. And I had studied with Gil Boyne in America. And I'd also been to Australia and did some training with the Australian Academy of Hypnotic Science on 2 occasions. And so I thought I'll start up, and I started up the Hypnotism Training Institute in those days. And so I went from there, you know.
How did it evolve to become alpha hypnosis training? Because it did change. Can I be curious?
Well, a bit of a story to that. I met a lady called Sue Wood, and she reckons alpha was out of date, you know, and hypnotism, no one used the word hypnotism these days. So it became alpha hypnosis. That's a short story. There's a bit more to it, but that's where it all started many years ago. 30 odd years ago, I met Sue.
I mean, you know, it was impressive to see when the Federation was still going, Hypnotherapy Federation, and the conferences where you would kind of have all of your students come and be presented with their diplomas and stuff. That was really inspiring to watch.
Yeah, well, I mean, we used to have the annual conference, and a lot of the students went there. I mean, over the years, I can't even estimate how many students I've had, but quite a lot of them are still practicing, well-known people. In fact, I had a client yesterday who went to a lady down in Christchurch many years ago, and she couldn't remember her name. I came up with the name, and I said, "Oh, that was one of my students many years ago," because we used to train in Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. You know, I loved training, and I continued to train until, well, just after the pandemic. Everything sort of started to slow down, and yeah, so I closed the school. Well, actually, I closed the school after that, and I started to see people individually, just people who just wanted to add to their skills, like psychologists or counselors, and they already had a lot of training. So I basically was just teaching them the hypnosis aspects, you know.
Nice. One of the things I guess I invited you to talk about is your take on a few things, because there are so many different points of view in this profession. Let's be honest. A lot of people who are going out there sort of say, hey, you know, there's no such thing as depth of hypnosis, or things like that. And I just wanted to talk about a few of those ideas or understandings from where you see it.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of look at maybe the Esdale scale, or how there have been studies? Stanford University, I think, did the suggestibility experiment, and there are quite a few people who've looked into this. What's your take on scale of depth when it comes to being hypnotized?
Well, when I first started, of course, I was really interested in all that. And in the class, we used to teach the 4 major scales. The Harry Aaron scale, which was, I think, my memory serves me correctly, about 6 different levels. And then you had 30 levels and 50 levels. And they pointed out that people can respond to suggestions at a high number, or what they call a deeper depth, and yet not respond to a lower number, and vice versa, you see. So really, you can't really rely on depth, in my opinion. And when they talk about depth, a lot of people think about getting sleepier and dreamier. I think it's how people respond to the words and the suggestions that you use. That's what makes a difference, because I believe the bottom line is it's all about suggestion, you know. And I mean, people don't even have to be relaxed to be hypnotized, and quite a few hypnotherapists don't realize that. they're quite surprised to hear that. So it's just the bypassing of the, as they say, the critical factor of the mind, the logical mind, the rational mind, and then they start to respond to the suggestions that you're giving them. If that is what they want to respond to, by the way, because people often say a lot of people have a fear even today, not as much as when I started, but a fear of hypnosis, and they want to bring along a support person, and that's fine. But when you hear that, it makes you think, I wonder what they know about hypnosis. And most people that I've met, they've seen it on telly or they've seen it in a stage show. And so it's a bit frightening for some people. But what they don't realize is that those people are called up as volunteers, and then they're handpicked because of the way they respond to the suggestions. And most of the people get sent back to their seats. But it doesn't mean they can't be hypnotized, but they're not suitable for that particular moment. And when I explain that to people, it takes a lot of the fear away, and explain to them that, well, actually, the subconscious mind doesn't exist. It's just a metaphor in a sense. And talk about the right and the left hemispheres and explain it to them. It helps them to understand it. Takes a lot of the fear away. Because as has been said by some very wise hypnotists, the only thing that stops people getting hypnotized is fear.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's particularly true, but
yeah, I think if someone hasn't got trust and you haven't established rapport for therapeutic reasons, long-term change may not happen so easily because people are going to have their guard on, and they may choose to override better sense. But even in conversation, we slip into conversational hypnosis all the time because we're processing, assimilating, we're imagining, we're getting emotional about stuff, and we're making decisions on the inside. We're changing our programming even through a single conversation. I'm just curious about how you see conversational hypnosis, how that can actually be quite profound. And for a lot of people, just even having a conversation, they enter into a very open, suggestible state of being, if you like. But what are your thoughts on that, Roger?
Well, obviously we do respond to things that people say to us. And conversational, Erickson was the master of that. But I find that, for me personally, I find that straightforward suggestion, not just straightforward, not just authoritarian suggestion, but sort of can make can make a difference in people's lives as well. And I believe a lot of people, like myself, if I'm listening to conversations, I'm analyzing everything that's said. So if I know, it's a bit difficult to explain this because we do know that conversational hypnosis is very effective, but lots of people are trying to be Ericksonian, and that is not easy. It's something that takes a long time to master, whereas just normal conversation, normal suggestions makes a lot of sense. And also the research that I've read in my studies is that conversational hypnosis is not any more effective than just ordinary positive suggestions. That may have changed. Maybe I haven't read the very latest, but that's where I am with that. I just find that people understand it when you talk straight to them, But when we're talking, we often allude to things. We use metaphors and similes and all that sort of thing. And people can respond to that. But what you mentioned before about rapport, I do believe but the most important thing in any model of therapy is rapport.
Mm.
And, you know, people teach various models, and they're the only ones that are going to fix people, according to them. But there are many models, and they're just as effective. You know, I read in magazines, NLP magazines, many years ago, that one guy wrote to them saying, "I've been to all the top experts, and I couldn't be helped until I went to this one person." So I think the personality, you're building rapport with people, does make a big difference, you know.
Mm. Absolutely. For me, I'm curious about the kind of styles of inductions that you've leant towards as a hypnotherapist. Do you want to share a little bit about your favorites and why you might pick those?
Well, I find that every hypnotherapist starts to feel comfortable with one particular induction method. But I think it's very useful to have several methods because, for example, if a client comes in, one of the first questions I ask them is, what experience, if any, have you had with hypnotherapy? And if someone says, "Oh, I went to a hypnotherapist, I want to know, was it helpful?" And sometimes yeah, of course it was very helpful. But other times they say, "Oh, no, I didn't get hypnotized." And I want to know why was that? What method did they use? And if it was a method that didn't seem to be effective for them, I'm not going to use that method. But if it was a method that was really effective for them, I'm going to use the same method. So I think having different models of induction is useful. In the class, I used to teach instant inductions, hypnotizing people with a handshake, things like that. And I don't use them very often, or very, very seldom in my therapy work. But I have had occasion where I've found it very, very useful. When a person, for example, I had a guy some time ago, and he actually said to me that he didn't feel any different. He wasn't even more relaxed than when we started. And I took him through several relaxation inductions. And finally, I said to him, "In a moment, I'm going to use a different method. I'll shake your right hand and you close your eyes." And so I did that. And he just went, responded immediately, totally relaxed. So it does come in handy sometimes when you've got a very, very skeptical person, very analytical person, because you have that instant bypass of the critical faculty, as they say.
Absolutely.
But my favorite induction at the moment is just a variation on relaxation, but talking about and drawing people's attention to what is actually happening in the body. Be aware of that feeling of your back against the chair. Notice your feet resting on the floor, that sort of thing. I find it very, very effective. And then I always do, with first-time clients, I always do eye closure, eye catalepsy, and explain that they're doing that themselves with their own mind. I think that's important. Another thing I do quite often, not every time, but before the actual induction, I use a pendulum and let them notice how their mind is affecting their physical body. And for quite a lot of people, that's a real experience, a real eye opener, And then you can go from talking about how your mind is affecting, it's actually your hand that's moving, even though you're not thinking about it, to how your mind can have an effect on your body, psychosomatic illnesses, so on,
Yeah. I think in also this day of ongoing stressors, there's a lot of people who are going through a lot of stress at the moment. And I think they often come to the hypnotherapist as the last resort, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always been the case. I've been here, I've been there, and if you can't help me, I don't know what I'm going to do. But as you mentioned, stress, of course, we all know stress is a big killer, in fact. And my specialty, I suppose I'd say, would be anxiety, because there seems to be so much anxiety around at the moment. And clients are getting younger and younger. I've had 8-year-olds suffering from anxiety, not wanting to go to school, things like that. So I love working with children. I don't specialize in that, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity to, in fact, change a life, because you can have such an influence on that subconscious, and of course, children are easy to work with.
Yeah. Well, when we're looking at, I guess, anxiety and, like you say, these little kids presenting with this level of anxiety, I don't even think it was in my vocabulary what anxiety or stress even was at that age,
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see how they're able to label how they're feeling so much more. And so there's an emotional literacy that's there, but often then the toolkit of how to deal with it is lacking.
Yeah. When you say it's lacking, yeah, well, they haven't learned any skills, and you don't learn these things at school. But I mean, the very first thing to help with anxiety, in my mind, is relaxation. And when they start to relax, they start to think differently, they see things different, and then of course you add your suggestions, which can be so powerful when they're relaxed. But anxiety and depression, when people come in with telling me that they're depressed, the first thing I want to know is who diagnosed you with depression, because it's just a common everyday word these days, and sometimes people are a bit blue or a bit down in the dumps, and they'll tell you that they're depressed. So I think, for me anyway, the first thing is I want to know, are they depressed according to who? Where did you get that diagnosis from?
A lot of people do Dr. Google, right? So, what's wrong with me? And I think when you are doing that intro form, or first talking about what's going on for that client, to make sure that it is actually a diagnosis, or maybe it just might be a hunch that they're feeling a certain way, because it can, if someone's seriously depressed, chronically depressed, and they haven't got the right support, maybe more umbrella support around them, then that's something to be mindful of. As we are hypnotherapists, we've got one scope of practice, but for some people, they might need a little bit more help by going to see their GP, or going to see someone in a place that can check in on them, maybe having friends or family understand the gravity of where they're at, and thinking about that wider support. What are your thoughts on that, Roger?
Well, my belief is a lot of people with depression, they go along for medical assistance, and they're given a prescription. And I mean, I've had several doctors in my classes over the years, and they're usually, well, quite often they've sent someone for hypnotherapy, they've seen the effects, and so they've come and done training themselves. But there's always side effects to medicine, doesn't matter what it is. And it's not really helping the person to deal with the cause of their depression. And, when I started, there was this idea you could have a chemical imbalance that was causing your depression, and so they were medicated for that. But over the years, I've come to the conclusion that it's our thinking and our situations and our attitude towards what's happening in our lives that cause the chemical imbalance, if there is a chemical imbalance. And so I really try to impress on my clients that the bottom line is what we are thinking. And, that saying is, you don't have to believe everything you think. I think that can be quite useful to keep in mind, because you can't control your thoughts. Your thoughts come in automatically. And if you allow them to control your life, that's not a good idea. Of course, it's not easy, but with hypnotherapy, it can really help people to change their thoughts, change their attitude, and that's why it's so effective.
I think too, a lot of people who have got depression and are struggling with anxiety, if you look deeper at their lifestyle, they might be eating rubbish and not exercising and not having the friendship connection, or something else is not quite right in their world. So I think hypnotherapy is good because we can apply it to that motivational reshift of what they want to change in their holistic sort of lifestyle. And that can often help them as well. What are your thoughts on that, Roger?
Yeah, well, when people come in, the first thing you want to know is what are they there for? What's your goal? What is it you want to achieve? How do you want your life to be different? And depending on what their feedback to you is, what is those feelings and your thoughts and so on, your beliefs are very important. What is it they're stopping you from doing that you would like to do, for example? And so try to get to the bottom of what's going on for them. Just recently had a lady came to me. She phoned me up. She's got to do a flight on a small plane. And she said she was afraid of this flight in a small plane. But when she came along, it turns out it wasn't just flying. It was fear of small spaces. So before we even started the hypnosis, just in the conversation, and I asked her, how long have you had this problem? She said, it goes back to about 11. So you ask all these questions, and I was getting nowhere other than, I changed my school, but I got bullied there, and I went back to my old school. And with continually asking questions appropriately, I felt, she said, just suddenly realized something. When I was 11 years old, I was asleep one night, and out comes the whole story. She woke up and half asleep, she went to open the door of a bedroom, and it was jammed. So she started banging on the door, she thought, and screaming, and no one came to assist her. And it turns out that later on she realized it was the door of her wardrobe. The thing is, it just came up just in the conversation, not even any induction or anything. So sometimes if you ask the right questions and you can get to the bottom, people really know I think people have the answers in themselves. It's just a matter of helping them, assisting them to discover,
When we're looking at memory and getting to the cause of something, what's your view on that? Do you think it's necessary for people to be able to overcome a fear of phobia, to be able to isolate why it was there to begin with, or do you think it's not always necessary? There are other ways of dealing with
it. I think both of those, finding out what the cause of a problem for some people is definitely necessary. But I have found that sometimes people respond to suggestions. If you give the right suggestions without doing a regression or any analysis, you can suggest that a person will remember some of the things in the past, but be able to move on from there. And that can be quite effective. But usually for things like phobias, I will use, certain techniques, and there's not really what would you call an official regression required, But it's still being used, and some Ericksonian people say that it's not necessary. In fact, I know of a hypnotist in England, is very well known, runs a school, and he says the worst thing you can do to your client is to regress them. So I think there's so many opinions and so many ideas around, and I think that you've got to find what's right for your client.
Yes, yeah. I've found on that note, one of the things that I'm tuning in on with a client is, do they need closure? If that is what the client needs and they've stated, I just want to understand, put it to bed, well, that's where you go. You don't ignore that just because you might have a belief that you don't need to re-traumatize, because you don't have to do regression in a traumatic way either. I think there's a misunderstanding there, isn't there, Roger?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely don't believe in re-traumatizing people, but with the techniques that we have, we can get people to go back and look at things from like a fly on the wall, for instance, detached, if you like.
Yes.
So there's and also there's so many modern techniques that have been discovered with our knowledge about the brain in the last 30, 40 years, with brain scans. And I mean, I remember when I first started, I heard a lady on the radio asking a psychiatrist about a phobia. And the lady said, the psychiatrist said, "How long have you had the phobia, dear?" She said, "Oh, about 20 years. And the answer surprised me. "Oh, it will take at least 10 years. And I thought, I've just been studying that you can do a phobia, help them in like an hour or two, even 20 minutes. I couldn't believe that, but that was the point of view. That was like, I'm going back now 40, 45 years, And so we've discovered so much about the mind, or the brain actually, and how it all works. And there's a lot more to discover, of course, but there's so many modern, if you like, modern techniques that can be so helpful to people and just can be very quick, very rapid improvements,
When we're looking at modern techniques, what springs to mind?
Well, I just mentioned phobias. I mean, the fast phobia, the rewind technique is one that one of my students, I remember a few years ago, she mentioned that I'm using the rewind for almost everything now. And she was a bit worried about, am I doing the right thing? If it's working, use it. If it's working for you, go for it. But that's one of the techniques that I use quite often, and it's very successful with most people. And I suppose, trying to think, look, I've learned so much and I've done so many courses over the years. It's all in there somewhere.
I understand. Yeah, when we're looking at that idea of, I guess, the old way of looking at people as being broken or flawed, and I think as a hypnotherapist, one of the most important mindsets to come into hold space for someone for change work is to believe that change is possible, and that whatever program they were running isn't permanent. It's just a phase or a program that made sense at that time for whatever reason it did, and that they can reprogram themselves. They can change the way they turn up to something emotionally and physically and so on. And I think it doesn't have to take, as you say, years and years and years. It can be quite rapid. When things make sense, they just do. And the capacity for that neuroplasticity to kind of reshape how a person views something, how the angle in which they're understanding it is really profound. And I think that's what hypnotherapists do best, potentially, is help that client to reframe something in their mind to just change how things are run.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there, because I've over the years, I've had many people come along. I'm sure everybody's had this every hypnotherapist had this. Oh, I've been going to counseling. How many sessions have you done? Oh, I've been going for 18 months, or I've been going for a year, or something like that. And I always want to know, does your counselor know you're coming here? Have you discussed it? And quite often they're sort of they're stuck. I know all about my problem, but it hasn't changed. And so usually just talking about it can be useful if the right conversation. But I remember one of my students, actually, many years ago, she came to me, she rang me up and said, I'd like to come and do some hypnotherapy. And she said, I've been going to a counsellor, I think, for 2 years. And I said, well, why are you coming to me? You know, she said, oh, well, my counsellor's on holiday, so I'm going to take the opportunity. So we came along, and honestly, you're talking about different techniques. I used the tapping technique. And she immediately noticed the difference. In fact, she was so blown away with it, she went and trained and is now practicing the tapping techniques. But she said to me at the time, I'm just a bit worried when my counsellor comes back, and if I tell her I've been here, that I might not get ACC to do more counselling. And I said, you probably won't need to do more counselling, but I'm sure it's available if you do need to. And then she went into practice, and I hadn't heard of her for years, you know, but that was another simple technique, modern, if you like to call it modern. I want to say modern, it's been around for 30 years, you know. I've done a lot of training in that. I'm doing a training course at the moment. It never stops. There's always something new to learn.
So what are you up to then, Roger?
Sorry?
What are you training in at the moment?
I'm training. Well, I've just finished doing some training with a medical doctor in Australia who specialises in Ericksonian hypnosis, and he's written a number of books, and he's taught around the world. And he stopped teaching online now, but I was very impressed with him, and I originally bought a book and decided to train with him. But now I'm training with an American coach who is highly regarded. So I'm just on the second day of that. But you never stop learning. I just love learning, you know.
With that, I'm just curious about the Ericksonian training with this doctor. What was his approach? Because of course, not everyone is Erickson, right? So not everyone's going to sound like Erickson, but there are some people that say, well, some of the language models aren't really what Erickson sounded like. We've kind of produced this pseudo Ericksonian style, which, if you actually look at some of his original stuff, it was way more subtle than I guess the language patterns that have been studied and brought into mainstream learning. What's your take on that, Roger?
Well, this guy was a medical doctor in Melbourne for many years, and he learned hypnosis with the old-fashioned, if you like, authentic and authoritative method, and that didn't really impress him. And then he heard about Erickson, and he went to America and he trained with Erickson personally, not long before Erickson passed away. But he's developed his own style, but based on Erickson, and he tells stories. He just has a conversation with people, and I haven't heard him using language patterns, but he just talks to people and listens to them. And in fact, one of the emails he sent out to us all was really about coaching, just listening to a person and hearing what has been effective for them and what really interests them in their life, and somehow using that. I must say that he's very effective, but I'm having difficulty totally understanding what he's doing. He's just having a conversation that seems to be doing the trick, you know. I find it quite fascinating learning from these different people. And sometimes you learn the same thing that you learned years ago, but there's a different perspective on it. And they say it differently. So you can pick up, it's like I look in the bookcase sometimes and I think, oh, I haven't looked at that for ages. And I'm attracted to it. And I open up, God, I don't remember reading that. And there's a whole new meaning coming out of that book for me, you know. I find that fascinating.
When I look at Erickson, I think the biggest thread that runs through people's understanding is utilization, is understanding the client's world, and being curious enough and also the belief that the client has the answer. I think there are themes that whatever Erickson was doing, when I observe that he utilizes a moment, a situation, the client's perspective, and is quite magical in that way of connecting. And he uses confusion as well to readjust stuff quite often, but in such an elegant way that it's not something you can script. And I think when I think about training others to do work, it is tricky because you can't be script bound when you're really client centered in that proper way. You know, if you want to use the client's world and the client's understanding, you've got to be ad lib. You know, and what's your take on the script side of things? People do lean into them clearly, and there's nothing wrong with them in some circumstances, in my opinion. But what's your thoughts on that?
On scripts, did you say?
Yeah, when we're coming back to utilization and what made Erickson so fabulous. I mean, he wasn't a script person. He wasn't following a script. He was looking at the person, that sensory acuity, and he was utilizing that moment in a really elegant way. And I'm just curious about where you see, I guess, hypnotherapists these days kind of leaning into scripts versus, you know, having that understanding of curiosity and utilization in a session.
Well, I think we all know that Erickson was a genius. And he, as you say, he looked, well, the first thing is Erickson said every client comes with the answers to their problem.
Yeah.
The answer is within. It's just our job is to help them to discover it. And I mean, when you read about Erickson, some of the ideas he came up with, you scratch your head, like, what made him think of that? You know, some of the stories, the story about the lady with the violets, I think, is pretty well known. The lady came in and she had no friends, and if I remember the story exactly, anyway, he discovered that she loved violets and grew violets. And so he got her to go along to the church and give gifts of violets to different people that were having birthdays, and that brought her lots of friends and acquaintances and led to her success with the therapy. You know, but who would think of that? You know, you gotta really get into someone's life and find out what their interests are and what their background is, and it takes a bit of time to ask the right questions. But in the long run, it turns out to be shorter than just a lot of techniques that people use that go on for weeks and weeks and months and months. Pardon me. You mentioned scripts. No, Erickson never used scripts, of course, and I don't use scripts myself now. But partly that's experience but I always teach with scripts because you need a starting point. And it doesn't matter whether you're a salesperson or anything, you learn scripts, you learn what to say on the telephone, and then you get ideas and you build on that. But I think the scripts are very important for beginners. But what I don't like is people who use a script and read word for word, you know. And I've had students in the past when they made their videos for their final exam, and you see them. One lady, she had books stacked around her on the floor. She'd read from a book, and when I didn't give her a pass, she got very upset. But yeah, so I mean, scripts are really useful to get you started, and they're a baseline, if you like, you know.
I think they're
And also
good.
the other thing, sorry, is sometimes when you read a script in the book, it gives you ideas, and it sparks your own thoughts and ideas. You know, you can work from there.
Yeah. Like inductions, you know, at some point, different people played around and made them up and then passed them on, and they became scripted. But, you know, you can use 1,000 different ways to take someone into hypnosis that's never been used before, that just has popped into your head as an interesting idea, and you run it. And if it works, hey, you've got something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you understand the foundations of why suggestion works, why an induction works, or why reframing is so powerful, and then that collection of understandings can be kind of calibrated in many ways, storytelling, metaphor, you know. So when we're looking at the idea of scripts, and for me, I like to get the student to read the script, have an experience first of all, then read the script, go play with that script, and then we do it another time without the script.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're very quickly going solo without the script, because I want them just to embed it, feel it, you know, hear it, just get it right into their system. And I break down why we're doing that within the script, so they have that embedded understanding.
Yeah, as you say, you know, there's so many ideas about script. Even when you start talking to people and they start talking about their past, they're tapping into the subconscious memories. And sometimes I've worked with clients without any induction, because they get into their feelings, or you might say without a formal induction. And you know, people talking about their emotions, just close your eyes and go into that. But I remember when I first started, all the mistakes I made at the beginning, but you learn from them, you know. But I had a lady came in one night, when I first started, and I was talking away to her. She had a fear of mice. She was coming for a phobia for mice. And I was talking away to her, and her head started nodding, and her eyes were closing. And I said to her, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah, you're doing it now." And I said, I'm doing what?" She said, "You're hypnotizing me." And I said, "No, I haven't started yet." And of course, she popped out of it. And when I sat in the chair and tried the induction, had no hope of working. And that was a really important lesson I learned from a silly mistake, you know. But you know, if I think back, some of the mistakes I made or things that I've learned have been really useful, and then I pass them on to the students, you know.
Absolutely. You know, I think when I do a demo, the students get a little bit intimidated because it's sort of really smooth and easy, and so I make it look simple. And I'm like, I was once where you are too. We all start at the beginning, and you, through practice, through understanding, you will get better. And it's incredible how quick that happens too. You know, by the time you move them through a full diploma course, how much more competent and confident they become versus that first session you did with them. They're going, "I don't know if I could do this," you know. Everyone has that. Well, not everyone, but most people get quite overwhelmed at the beginning.
Well, in the classes I used to run, I like to get people doing some hypnosis fairly much from the start. Get the feel of it, using a script just to get them started. But there are some schools. There's a school in New Zealand actually that I've had people referred to me from them, because you've got to do something like 4 or 5 years before you're
Mhm.
allowed to start hypnotizing people. And it
Mm.
just makes it all seem very, very mysterious and even dangerous. But
Yeah.
the other thing about hypnosis is, you mentioned before about people helping themselves. I like to teach my clients self-hypnosis and some of the other self-help skills like tapping and things like that.
Mm.
They're simple to use in a self-help way, so I find them very effective.
One of the things that we often use, of course, is anchors, post-hypnotic anchors. Are you
Yes,
a fan of doing that, Roger?
absolutely. In fact, sometimes I get a person to at home think up some times when they were very successful or when they felt very, very happy. And then they come along and we go through that and I anchor that. And then I use that to help them with the current problem. So anchoring I mean, we're being anchored to things every day without even knowing it. So
Mm.
it's very effective. So I usually teach people methods of anchoring for themselves.
Mm.
And again, it's a self help technique.
Yeah. And again, I think the anchor needs to make sense to them. So that utilization, if I hear someone, if I say to a person, hey, what's the color of strength? If strength had a color, and they say purple, for argument's sake, then I might reutilize that as an anchor later, and invite them to think about it. Every time you want to feel strong, I want you to imagine that purple in your mind, so that it can be really drawing from the client, as you allow them to participate in those experiences of what that mood, that desired state is for them,
Yeah,
and a power word or a situation. Like, what situation would you like to feel that strength? Oh, when I go through that threshold, every time I go to work, I want to feel that strength. Okay, so every time you go through that threshold,
yeah,
you walk in those doors, you suddenly feel really strong, really. So it's kind of always thinking, yeah, what is the client telling you in that session? Yeah, right.
exactly. A lady I had recently went to another hypnotherapist many years ago and was given an anchor, a verbal anchor, that every time you need some extra confidence or belief, you say 20, 20, 20. It was a new one on me, but it worked. And here she was, I think it was about, it would have been quite a number of years ago when she learned that. And I said to her, does that still work? Why aren't you using that for your problem at the moment? She said, oh, it works for some things, but not for everything. So I found that quite interesting. It was,
Yeah.
it was but well, I've read it in books, you just say these words. But I find that using words and a physical anchor can be even more effective. And I've used that for myself very effectively. Because I remember little on the personal side, I don't mind sharing it, but because I share it with a lot of clients. But when I first started teaching, I used to dread every Wednesday night because we used to run our classes on Wednesday night. And I'd never done any public speaking before. And I remember saying to Warren one time, listen, Warren, I need some help or I've got to give this up. And he says, why? And I said, because I'm so anxious every Wednesday night. I find myself thinking, how can I get out of this? No, I don't want to. Yes, I do want to, the approach avoidance. And at the time, I did some hypnotherapy with Warren, but I also learned anchoring. So I decided to use an anchor, and I only ever had to use it once, and it worked, and it absolutely changed my life. And I've done quite a number of television interviews and programs on TV and radio talk back, and I absolutely loved it. So, just learning anchoring and a bit of hypnotherapy made such a difference in my whole life. So I'm very enthusiastic about hypnotherapy.
Absolutely. Now, I would like to just say thank you so much. Are you willing to come back and have another little chat with me and we can explore a little bit more? Would you be open to that, Roger?
That would be lovely. I'd enjoy that.
Excellent.
It's always good talking to you, Meredith.
Thank you so much for the wealth of information today and just sharing your perspective and sharing your journey of how you came to become a clinical hypnotherapist and a trainer as well. I'm sure others out there who are interested in that path, it's made them think maybe it might be for them, I know for me it's been a calling, not just a job, and I'm thinking it's probably been the same for you.
Oh, absolutely. This is my life, and it has been for 50 years. So, and I've studied with some amazing people, Gil Boyne, I got to know him personally. That was an experience in itself, because he was such a major influence on hypnotherapy, as we know. And quite a few people over the years. I've lost track of how many well-known people I've studied with personally, but it's been a treat. And what I love about it is you learn something, you can pass it on and help other people. I find that that's very, very satisfying.
Absolutely.
And sorry, another thing I notice, a lot of young people come in today and they don't seem to have any purpose. I believe you do have to have a purpose and a meaning in your life, and whatever that meaning is for you, that's important,
Yeah, 100%. So thank you so much for today, and thank you everyone for joining in. If you are interested in becoming a clinical hypnotherapist, you can check out the website nzach.ac.nz and download the prospectus. But for now, thank you everyone for tuning in. And if you like this, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back here in another week. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.